Great, we're on.
Cool. This is, I feel like I'm on a live podcast.
If you can hear me, I have a slight audio issue, so I'm going to try to fix that real quick.
Oh, cool. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I'm good.
Great.
Cool.
So can we see, oh, good, thanks. And can we see how many folks will join or like will be here?
So I'm not sure.
Cool.
It looks like folks are on now. They're listed as participants in the live stream, but I'm not sure if we can see them on here. Please say, is that right? Is that Ask our Tech moderator?
Yes, I guess we have an expert.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that folks could type in the chat here and then we could see it too. Just make sure we're not talking into the void. Okay, cool. So we've confirmed that there are people here. We might only be able to see you if you type. So feel free to type and be chatty and talk about why unions are cool and what you're interested in learning today.
Yes. And we'll give folks a few minutes to join, and we'll start at like 03.
Cool.
Cool. I have an embarrassing story I'll share while we're waiting.
Okay.
All good opening. So recently we did a big unit onboarding meeting. They just ratified their CBA, so we were doing like a big intro meeting and call and getting everyone signed up for dues. And it was just, and this unit had been working for 15 months to get to contract, so they were tired. It was just a whole thing. And but they were all there, and a worker who was on the bargaining team did a great dues ask and had everyone sign up for dues. And there were about 3 minutes of just kind of waiting for folks to, get signed up and join their union. And I was like, okay, I need to bring the energy. I need to get, people hyped. It's like, I'm going to play Solidarity Forever. So I'm like, Meg, the CWG president is like, great idea, share your sound. So I'm like, hey, y'all, I'm going to play Solidarity Forever, hype this song up. And I'm just like jamming. I can't sing, but like singing along, bopping for 2 out of the 4 minutes of this song. And then halfway through, Meg unmutes herself and is like, Taylor, are you under the impression that there is music playing? And I was just singing Solidarity Forever to myself in this 25-person unit. And no one told me. No one said anything for 2 minutes.
I think that's really making yourself vulnerable as a union organizer. It's just going solo a cappella Solidarity Forever.
And I'm sure everyone was like, wow, she's really, really committed.
Cool. So I'm seeing about 15 participants here. So I think that's who's on.
Great.
So yeah, I guess we should just go for it.
Cool.
And just as a brief tech issue, we were hoping to do some interactive stuff. So folks who are on could try typing something into the chat just to make sure that works. Just a test message or hello or something. That'd be great.
Favorite joke.
I saw something pop up briefly.
I know. I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah, we can just get started.
Great. So did you see anything from the chat, though?
I haven't seen anything yet. I want to confirm that we're not talking into a void.
We'll see. Voids are always comfortable. Okay, cool. Well, so excited to be here with y'all today to talk about how to unionize your campaign, workplace, organization, etc. So my name is Taylor Billings. I use she, her pronouns. I am the organizing director with the Campaign Workers Guild, which is a union formed in 2017 by and for largely campaign workers and political firm workers to fight and win workplace rights in the campaign industry. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I remember to see him. I'm based in DC. I mostly do political communication, although Taylor and I crossed over kind of mid-career. I learned how to be a field organizer after doing a lot of desk office kind of work in DC. And most recently, I started working at Catalyst, which is a political database firm that works with progressive campaigns, Democratic campaigns, and unions. And we unionized earlier this year through the campaign to organize digital employees with the Communications Workers of America. So I'm a huge fan of unions and want to share, what we've learned. I'm excited about union organizing in our field.
So exciting. Thanks, Aaron. So today we are going to talk through, which workers are unionizing across the country, lots of them, why they're unionizing, what a union is, how to go about forming a union and the typical process. And then that's all nice in theory, but Aaron's going to talk a little bit about what that process actually looks like and did look like in his workplace. And then we'll pause for some Q&A and comments, depending on how the chat is working out. We have a little activity around organizing and deciding on strategy for voluntary recognition. And then we'll wrap up with some conversation around, broadly union organizing and what that looks like across industries and some things to watch out for as you're organizing. So that is the overview for the day. Throughout, if you have any questions, comments, or we're going too fast or too slow, or using jargon, any of that good stuff, please let us know in the chat, and we can address any questions that way. So to kick us off, I will pass it off to Aaron first.
Yeah, so just briefly, we all know kind of the long history of unions in the United States, and of course private sector unions and other types of unions. The narrative and the numbers have been that they were in decline for many years. And I think over the past year or two in particular, with the pandemic, we've just seen this huge resurgence in union organizing and workers wanting more say over what's happening in their workplaces. And that's happened formally through unions, that's happened informally through people resigning and renegotiating and figuring out what their work life is going to be like in a COVID world, whether that's workplace safety or whether that's us, who are doing more kind of office work, working from home. So, there's been a huge amount of labor activity and labor agitation. There's been a huge number of strikes. A lot of the unions, if you follow the stuff online, have branded this, Striketober, Strikevember, Strike Word, and Strike Moss now. That's really exciting. And we've seen union pushes at huge companies that have gotten a ton of attention. So Amazon, we saw yesterday, Starbucks had some workers unionize for the first time in a long time, which is super exciting. And we've also seen this happen in our field. So we've seen individual campaigns organized through Campaign Workers Guild. We've started to see more unionization in the nonprofit sector, in the political firms that serve our campaigns, and also in the party committees and the party bodies themselves. So, the DNC, there's been a lot of organizations that have intentionally formed with a lot of worker solidarity baked in. There's been places that have had good experiences forming their unions with their managers, places that have had difficult experiences. So we want to talk about some of those. But basically, there's a ton of union activity out there. There's also union activity in state legislative bodies, which is super interesting. This is just a really exciting time for unions, and I'm excited for us to live into our values a little bit more as progressives and as Democratic aligned campaigners, and get more unionization happening in our field, because it is the best way for workers to have a say in what they're doing and the workplaces.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.
And so Taylor, why are people unionizing though? Like, what is the actual reason to unionize if you're not already convinced that unions are good and awesome?
Yes. Okay. So aside from the fact that unions are great, there are a few very real motivating factors for why workers unionize and why they go through the trouble, frankly, which can be long and intense and also beautiful and transformative, organizing union. And the first, I think, and the thread that goes throughout this is around power. And so when workers come together and promote their common interests or demand recognition and demand to bargain over their workplace conditions, that inherently is a shift of power. And so that is really powerful and kind of scary and can be intimidating and also transformational. And so when workers come together and form a union, they get a seat at the table. And there's also, I think, a piece of this, especially with more progressive and democratic leaning organizations, where it is a little bit of living your values. So many democratic organizations and campaigns and candidates are pro-union. And so it's really important that those candidates and organizations, that those workers and their rights and their union is respected and recognized. through the unionization process. So there are also some really tangible benefits, right? So when you form a union, you get to negotiate over your terms and conditions of employment. What that really means is you get together to bargain and determine hours and schedules, holiday, vacation, insurance, retirement, anti-harassment rules and systems for reporting sexual harassment. You get clear rules around discipline and what your rights are as a worker. You typically go from an at-will employee where you can be fired and disciplined for any reason to a just cause employee where the employer has to have a reason and follow a specific process to discipline or terminate a worker. And so this is all pretty incredible, especially in industries where workers have historically been really exploited and there are many barriers to entry. So thinking about long hours, poor pay, requiring folks to have a car or move on a short notice, all of those have, especially in the campaign world, created barriers where the majority of workers, or many workers, have historically been wealthy, young, and white. And so thinking about how to unionize and ensure that workers' interests and rights are being respected will ideally, and has in many cases, lower those barriers of entry to ensure that low-income folks, parents, folks of all ages, people of color, all of these historically, these groups, these folks that have just been barred entry because of how insurmountable and how exploitative this industry can be, can now suddenly have their rights respected and feel like this is a job, that an industry that people can grow in and meaningfully be a part of. So that's why, folks are unionizing, and happy to answer any questions about that. I think taking a step back a little bit about what is a union, right? And so I'm sure folks have heard and seen of different unions like CWA. It's also a lot of alphabet soup. So CWG, CWA, AFL-CIO, SEIU, UE, you name a letter and it's probably a union. And so at its core, though, a union is just a group of workers who come together to promote their common interests. That's it. So what that looks like in actuality, right, is literally a group of workers coming together to promote their common interests. And typically that group of workers, or often, I should say, those workers may choose to affiliate with a larger union, with CWA, with CWG, with AFL-CIO. And that gives basically just a different set of tools to those workers. And there's a number of strategic reasons why or why not you should or could or need to affiliate. We'll get into that in a second. But once workers form a union, you end up collectively bargaining, so workers and management bargaining over those terms and conditions of employment. And the end result is a contract, a legally binding document that outlines those terms and conditions of employment. And unions are democratic. So you elect representatives to your bargaining team who represent you at the table with management. You choose which union to affiliate with, and you accept or reject the contract. And that's really important because although, a small number of workers might be representing you at the table, it is all workers who get to make these decisions. And same goes with what type of action to take. So throughout the organizing process, and Erin will speak to this in a little bit, taking collective action is kind of the whole point. So if management is not meeting you on compensation, or they are refusing to bargain, it's really important that your full unit, all the workers will decide to take action, whether that's a sign-on letter or a walkout. And so that's a decision of the collective, not of a small group within that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the typical process of what union organizing is meant to look like, and then Erin's going to speak a bit about how that actually works, or worked in his case. Every organizing process is unique, which is exciting, but there are some general principles that we'll discuss. So if you are setting out to organize your workplace, you will want a goal of 100% of workers to be on cards, meaning signifying that they want to join the union. Think about, a goal of 100%. Some unions require a certain number. So CWG requires at least 70% of workers to be on cards. And that's really a minimum. We want 100% of workers, especially if it's a small workplace, right? This process takes time. So I've seen contracts bargain in 3 sessions. I've seen contracts take 15 months to bargain. So if you're on an election in particular, we have a minimum amount of time that we require for, workers to have. So we require around 12 weeks. There are some exceptions, but we do generally require around 12 weeks before your election day. So you've got the time, you've got the goal. And so the next thing you want to do is find a staff list. And so then you'll want to talk to your coworkers, talk to your colleagues, and figure out what issues they're facing in the workplace. What are they upset about? What do they like? What do they want to change? What would be nice if they had? What are the big issues? And these conversations are organizing conversations. If I say, Aaron, hey, do you want to join a union?
Yay!
Yay! He also might be like, I don't know.
Why? I'm really happy already. I love my boss. What union? What were you wanting on strike? What's going on? Yeah,
exactly. But if I say, Aaron, how's work going for you? Right? If I'm like, what issues do you care about? How was your last paycheck or whatever?
Could be better, sure.
Yeah, could be better, sure. And then all of a sudden I've got an opening to talk a little bit more about how collective action could change the things that he cares about most. And that's a little bit of a better entry than saying, hey, you want to join a union? So, which I know could also, maybe be feasible. Okay, the key thing here while you're having these one-on-one conversations is I would recommend keeping them one-on-one to begin with, and definitely keep it confidential. So no workplace is too progressive to be anti-union or retaliatory. Just full stop. And you do want to start with workers. So especially in the nonprofit world and on campaigns as well, there can be blurred lines between who is a manager, who is a supervisor, and who is a worker. But you'll want to think about if anyone has hire, fire, discipline, or reward power, they are probably a supervisor or a manager. So I wouldn't start with them. If you are one of those people, like I was a middle manager in an old job and I wanted to unionize the workplace. So I started talking to other middle managers, and then we tried to figure out a plan on how to talk to workers that wasn't an intimidating and bad process. We ended up deciding that it probably was maybe going to be an intimidating bad process. So instead we were like, we are pro-union if you ever want to be pro-union, which was kind of an interesting workaround. But once you start talking to workers and people are on board and you're building good relationships and organizing, it's at its core, that's what this is. It's relationship-based organizing. You want to start an organizing committee. And this is a smaller group of folks who will carry out most of the work here. There is a lot of work like admin and meeting with people and assuaging concerns and addressing concerns and all that good stuff. So you probably do want a group of, 5, 6 people, depending on the size of your workplace, to help carry out this work. And again, keep your communication off work platforms. Please use your personal email, Signal. Don't do this on your work Slack. And then you can slowly start to expand your circle, start talking to more and more people to get toward that 70 to 100% range of people saying yes. So, and it's at that kind of second stage where you can start to address some of the people who are like, I'm not so sure, maybe. That's a good time once you've got, more folks on board. Then you will want to get commitments to sign union cards. So we just talked about organizing conversations that were a little bit softer. This is when you're like, okay, Aaron, we want to change our pay. We're going to get more vacation. We want to unionize to, take collective action to secure workplace rights. Can you sign a card? Are you for that?
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh yeah, great. Sign.
Let's go.
That's when the hard ask comes in. So you can hold a meeting to do this. You can do it all together. You can do it one-on-one. It's up to you. Once you've got 70 to 100%, let's dream big in this scenario. 100% of workers are on cards. You are going to demand voluntary recognition from management. So this is literally a letter that you email management and say, hello, we have formed a union. Will you recognize us? Respond by Friday. And management will say, yes, we recognize you. Let's bargain. Or they will say, no, we want a card check, or we want an election, or we're just not going to respond to your email. On elections, because of that time constraint, we really focus in on escalating pressure to get to voluntary recognition. In other workplaces, you can still escalate to get to voluntary recognition, and or you can organize to win an election, which we can answer questions if there are some about that. Then after that, your union is recognized. How exciting. You will elect bargaining committee members to start forming proposals about these different terms and conditions of employment. You will meet management at the table. You'll start to bargain over them. And then the unit as a whole, all the workers will then vote to accept or reject the final contract once the bargaining committee and management have one. Phew, easy though. 5 steps, no big deal. Any questions about just the nuts and bolts of it before Erin talks a little bit about what that is like? Okay, fabulous. Erin, over to you.
Yeah, so our experience with the Catalyst Union, I feel like was kind of standard, although parts of it were new for us as people who work in progressive data politics and whatnot. Oh, hey, Amy, thanks. Great. Like I said earlier, Catalyst is a database company. It works with progressive causes, with Democratic campaigns. Oh, hey, John. Hey, great to see John. We both met John. So Catalyst is interesting that it's a company that is it's run through a trust, and that trust includes a lot of unions. It works with a lot of unions, so it's a very pro-union work environment. It's just never happened to have a union before. A couple of us had just been chatting. Is this something that we should do? We learned that there have been some previous conversations about it that had never really gotten formalized. No one had created like a dedicated organizing space. So we created a dedicated organizing space online, a non-work Slack where we could chat with each other. And where we were inviting people to that and discussing unionization and workplace organizing. So, the people who showed up to that initially are the folks you would expect, folks who are ideologically pro-union, yay, unions are good, this is great. And because we're a progressive organization, that was a lot of us. So we had a nice core organizing committee. And then the next step for us was finding a union to formally affiliate with, to help us organize, to help us walk through all these steps that Taylor just covered. So we talked to a bunch of different unions, and Code CWA stood out to us because Code stands for the Campaign to Organize Digital Employees. And for our firm, a lot of my colleagues, they're software engineers, they're data scientists. So they're working in progressive politics, but the other types of places that they work are tech companies. So like one of the other organizations that CWA and Code work with is the Alphabet Workers Union at Google, right? So that's a firm that they pass through. So sort of in our industry, the subcategory of that industry, the tech people who work in politics. So once we got up with Code CWA, they were able to pair us with an organizer who had done a bunch of campaigning before, and who was adapting their methods to this progressive tech space. And he was able to guide us through a lot of the steps that we needed to take. Their union in particular, their method is focused on like getting you to sign a statement of values together first. And that's the first time you're all putting your name together down on a piece of paper and democratically figuring out kind of what your message is and what your core values are. And you're not necessarily sending that to management, but you're all seeing each other sign that. So that's like a very core act of solidarity you're doing right there. Then we moved on in our organizing and started talking to more folks who weren't necessarily rah-rah about the union for whatever reason. And I think some of the common things you're into were maybe a little skeptical about dues and talking about how our contract would more than cover dues at the initial phase. Other folks are just busy and have other stuff going on and didn't have time for union organizing. So a common response was, I like this idea, I don't have time to go to meetings or join a Slack or whatever, but let me know when the card signing party is and I will sign a card. Then when, we were pretty close to our goal, which was 70%. Initially with the folks who were rah-rah about the union, we got a couple more folks signed up. We were tracking all this in a spreadsheet pretty deliberately. We had a pretty good idea of who was in management versus not in management, that sort of thing. Then, when we had the numbers, we went to the card signing party. We did that online. The president of our union local came on. He played Solidarity Forever on his local sound system. So we got the good union song vibes. Then the next day, CWA had some communication support. So we sent our formal letter to management asking for voluntary recognition. They reached out to a labor reporter, which is part of their practices when they do this with any organization they're unionizing with. And management responded almost right away within hours and did voluntary recognition. And that's how a lot of these progressive campaigns have gone. And for us, this wasn't like in the heat of campaign season either. So we won voluntary recognition. Where we're at in the process now is we elected members of the bargaining committee, and they are bargaining our first contract, which is super exciting. And I think the key thing for us, just to build on something Taylor said, was there were a few folks involved initially who were mid-career, and I think that was a good dynamic because a lot of the folks who are earlier career who might think like they're taking a risk in unionizing and they're sticking their necks out, the participation of some more mid-career folks kind of made that safer. And I think just very quickly seeing how many people were initially interested in forming a union already assuaged a lot of the nervousness or trepidness that people might
feel. I also think, Erin, you mentioned you weren't in the height of campaign season. Do you want to speak a little bit to what we were talking about yesterday about the timing piece and how that can fit into organizing strategy?
Yeah, so I know other unions and other workers at organizations that are similar to ours, they've had the experience of asking for voluntary recognition, like heading into GOTV in October. And that's really, really high pressure, not just on management, but also on the workers. I think the one thing that's really interesting about organizing in this space is that we're all here to win. We want to win our campaigns. We want to elect our Democratic reps, right? So we're here to win, and I think often part of the message to management in a lot of these campaigns has been forming a union makes us more effective. It aligns our values with the work that we do in a really practical way. And if management is dragging their feet for whatever reason, and it's October, it's like no one wants to have a walkout on like October 15th heading into an election day, right? Nobody wants a bad news story about union busting or not getting on board with the union. So that's a really powerful tool that I think we have when we're doing these union organizing campaigns, because it's one of those areas where the workers' interests and management's interests all align, and especially for an organization that has clients that are doing really important stuff around GOTV. You gotta get it done so that we can all get back to our work and focus on winning our campaigns.
Yeah, and I think that's so CWG, Campaign Workers Guild, is a nonpartisan union, and I think when we are organizing with workers on elections or in workplaces whose bosses love talking about how much they love unions, that is such a degree. It's such an important leverage point, frankly, because if they are dragging their feet, Erin, to your point, like it's that hypocrisy is really kind of horrible and very powerful. Like if you are a pro-union candidate and you don't want to be seen, like there's a lot of pressure to get to the table quickly and to live your values in a way that's really important. Yeah. But as we've discussed, no workplace is too progressive to not be anti-union, so do be careful. Okay, so we'll take a quick pause for questions if there are any comments. Otherwise, and then, if anyone has anything they'd like to add or ask about, all ears.
I dig John's proposal here to make how to form a union a standing agenda item for progressive convening. I'm into it. I'm down.
So funny. I feel that. Okay, great. John, thank you for being here. How exciting.
All right. So John asks how new union members should engage with their union.
Yeah.
I would say with a lot of these new unions, I found we were sort of making up how we run our union as we went along. So we've developed some practices like having votes on Slack using emojis for folks who maybe don't have a long time to engage. We use a little bit of, not like Robert's Rules of Order, but some basic parliamentary and organizing methods. If something's not too controversial and a conversation's dragging on about kind of a minor point, we'll just say like, okay, unanimous consent for this proposal. Any objections? No objections. Motion carried. Moving on. So that's made it efficient and a good use of people's time, because especially for new unions, we're meeting outside of regular work hours. People have other stuff going on. But I think the thing that is the most interesting about unions is like they are democratic, so you can be as involved as you want to be. one of the things that we did initially based on CWA's training was just take turns with lots of stuff so people would have new opportunities to do things, whether that was making a meeting agenda, facilitating a meeting, taking notes, whatever. You want the folks who aren't usually the gabby talkers like me to make sure that they also have the space to participate in the meetings, to shape the agenda. You really want it to be something where you're all in it together, and it's definitely one of those organizing things where going slower together is way better than a couple people trying to go fast with a smaller group.
Yeah, and I think like outside of bargaining, there's lots of ways to get involved too. We often, a lot of our units decide to make different committees. So there's social media or solidarity committees or an organizing committee in addition to a bargaining team. And so we also have like an onboarding team sometimes where you can have different workers trained to do different things based on their knowledge, know-how, comfort, and availability. And so I would encourage newer folks to think about, especially ones that are really excited. I would have the bargaining team or organizing committee or stewards have just brainstorm different roles that people can have and have those on hand. So when people are excited, it's really easy to plug folks in. But it's like a mini, there's really dozens of ways that people can get involved. We've had like a swag team. We've had people do like social events and stuff. Unions are fun, right? So you can kind of plug in however people want to. Yeah. Okay. So Luke asked, why do you think more party orgs and campaigns aren't unionized yet? Great question.
Wait, what do you think, Taylor?
Well, I think, listen, the first campaign ever to unionize was just in 2017. So that really wasn't that long ago, right? So think about how far we've come in just that amount of time. That counteracts literally decades of really exploitative, harmful culture that was rife with union busting and intimidation and guilt tripping to stop workers from having their rights respected. So I want to acknowledge the decades of work from workers that got us to this point and the immense progress that CWG and now, we were the only union and the first union to represent campaign workers. And now there are over 7 and some of the biggest names in the biggest unions in the country. That's huge. That's incredible. We were like a ragtag group of campaign workers dedicated to transform the industry. And that in many ways has happened, right? Or is happening. And I think there is a lot of anti-union sentiment and feeling and lack of education on what being in a union is and what it takes and what it can and can't do for workers. Forming a union doesn't fix bad bosses,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and that power transfer I was talking about earlier is intense, and so I think those barriers still very much exist. And I also think that what I said earlier is true. There is no progressive workplace or no too progressive workplace to be anti-union. I think a lot of workers have faced difficulty in organizing in any workplace. And that's certainly true for in the campaign world as well.
Yeah, I think another piece of it is just people haven't done it. I think one of the big tensions here is, the most progressive, far-sighted pro-union manager can't go to their workers and say like, hey guys, want to form a union? It's got to come from the workers. And depending on how organizations are structured, if you have seasonal workers who are working contracts or functionally temporary jobs that work on the seasonal campaign cycle, this relentless every 2-year cycle that our industry is on, it's harder for folks to think longer term and say, I want to form a union here. And that's changing, which is good. And like Taylor said, now there's more organizing resources. There's more social proof that unions are working across all of our organizations and industries. And I think there's also a big generational shift in how we see the types of jobs that should have unions. Like, it's cool to see coders and software engineers say like, wait, I'm a worker. Like, I might not wear a hard hat, but this is work, this is labor, and that's cool. Like, my first job was at a ShopRite in Jersey, and it was UFCW, and I grew up in a union town. I took that for granted, and I think, when I went to college and started working in politics, that was like poof. Like okay, well, this isn't like a very unionized field. This is different stuff, and I think there's been a big shift culturally, and I think the unions are also like organizing more in these industries because it is all labor. And I think as we recognize campaign work as a valuable form of labor, whether it's seasonal labor, permanent labor, whatever it is, then we recognize ourselves as workers, have an interest in being together.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to the question about, is this a slow growth or something that will take off? I think all the things that we think take off really have had slow growth for years before that. And so, I think the movement to unionize campaign workers in particular, I think unionization in like American history, I think goes long beyond what I'm speaking about. But the campaign work unionization in particular has been mounting for years. I mean, as you would expect in an industry where people are routinely asked and demanded to work 90-hour weeks with no breaks, moving on the drop of a hat, and with no HR. So I think that has been growing forever and ever, since the dawn of the exploitation of workers in the campaign industry. And I think to Erin's point, once it was proven that unionizing campaign workers works, then that growth I do believe, is truly exponential in a way that's really important. Because once you're on one union campaign, you're going to organize your next workplace. Why would you want to not be on a union campaign the next time? If we're doing our jobs right, and if unions are doing their jobs right. So that's the answer there.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll speak to that I think has come up in some conversations at the conference already is like the culture of paying your dues is often exploitative, right? There's a good version of paying your dues, and that we all have these campaign stories where it's like you're sleeping on an air mattress in some weird supporter housing, you're sleeping in your car or whatever, and it's like those are bad work conditions, like real talk. So I think changing that culture is something generational, and I also think that's important because I think it's bad marketing for political labor if we're out there telling these war stories and we're so proud of how terrible our working conditions were and how gross our campaign offices were or whatever. Like, what are we advertising? Right?
The other day I was doing a training and someone was like, "Why do people do this?"
Love the game. Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And they were like, and I was like, no, genuinely, like the power organizing is incredible. And organizing, I think, in campaigns, and in nonprofits, it should be sustainable. Like it should be a career where you can enter in and become skilled at this job, which it is skilled labor. Not all labor is skilled, but anyway, it is a job that you aren't replaceable. My skills, your skills, our skills, people's skills, even if they've never walked onto a campaign before, their lived experiences and what they're bringing to the campaign is unique and should be respected. And so I think that when you are, we share these war stories because, it's like why hazing works. Trauma builds connection, and not works, but is popular. And obviously I'm not pro hazing.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I think that there's some some victor, pride in that. And it's like, well, why can't we flip that and have the pride be around taking collective action with your coworkers to demand a livable wage and a career that is just that, one that can feed your family, provide with good take-home pay, and be rewarding. And I think that is, that community building, that solidarity is why people love campaigns, and it doesn't have to come at the expense of your livelihood and your well-being.
That's really important. It's a much more healthy, productive way to have solidarity.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be about sleeping in your car. And I think that candidates, and we're not here to talk about management, but I do think that, it is, it's astonishing the conditions that workers, and of course I'm not surprised, right? I understand where it's coming from, but it is, it's just so desperately needing to change, and is changing, but I can't believe I ever worked 90 hours a week for nothing. What was I thinking? But yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? And if not, we'll do this little activity. Right? Okay. So I have not, maybe have to admit, I did not practice sharing my screen before we were here. So we shall see. Oh, John asked, do we have any advice for managers who want to foster union-friendly environments? I have 2 thoughts.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, the first is I am seeing, I think the first and foremost is that, like, stay out of it, kind of, like this union is for workers by workers. And so I think the best managers I've seen are ones that leave the union organizing to the workers, frankly. And I have seen, I've seen some contracts say that like management will like a commitment to voluntarily recognize a union should it form. That's a big one. So if you say, you can have this in your onboarding documents or in hire offer letters, like if workers choose to unionize, I will voluntarily recognize them. That's something that a provision you could put in on any type of campaign or in any organization. And I think, those are the 2 things I'll share.
Yeah, the perspective of managers on this is interesting because you have legal obligations, and that often means that you can't, even if you're hyper supportive of a union at your own workplace, you feel like you can't talk about it, right? Because that's what your legal counsel said. I do think there are ways that managers can demonstrate their support for unions and unionizations that aren't their company or their firm or their party body or whatever. And it could be as simple as sharing great news about unions and just demonstrating that you're pro-union and your organization shares that value, shares those values. And that could be everything from like, hey, everyone, here's this Kellogg strike going on. Here's the brands that I'm not buying at the grocery store. Or, hey, isn't this great news about Starbucks unionizing? That's so cool. Or even sharing news about unionizing in our field. That's not about you or your company or your campaign, but it demonstrates like, okay, this is not someone who's gonna hire some union busting firm and go after me. And I feel like that creating that signaling that people aren't going to suffer if they organize in your company is good. And I think sometimes you're lucky to have managers who grew up in the union movement and are totally on board. I think other times managers can neutrally say like, hey, some unions are good, some unions are less good, that those kind of non-committal comments or kind of legalese comments. And sometimes that can have a chilling effect. So, avoiding that kind of legalese stuff and just keeping it general is probably a good way to respond.
Yeah, that I think is so spot on, Aaron. And I think there's 2 other things that brought up for me. The first is that union busting firm piece. If your workers unionize, think really critically about the lawyer, the legal team that you are going to hire. I think there's some really great, there's a big difference between management side attorneys that have a union background and have represented workers and or are committed to that and not. So I would really do your research there. It makes a huge difference at the table. It really does. The second piece is if you are not management, like if you are not going to be representing management at the table, act in solidarity with your workers. Like if workers come and ask you to sign on to a sign-on letter to support something, or if they ask you, if you're like a middle manager, you're still a worker, you're not management, right? So you have a space to act in solidarity, to support workers and the union when they ask you to do something, and you should do it. And also if you're in a meeting where management is being anti-union or kind of ceding any of that, you can speak up with other managers, and you can do that kind of one-on-one organizing we spoke about earlier and kind of help to ensure the whole workplace understands why the union is important and what it can do for everyone, right? Not just the workers in the union.
And this is a little nuanced, but sometimes there's ambiguity about whether or not someone is in the union in the bargaining unit or not, and that's often folks who are in kind of middle manager positions. So I know another union, they had an org structure where a lot of people had one person reporting to them, and this is unique. But part of what they negotiated was, you need to have more than one direct report to be in management, and that was interesting. That doesn't often happen in our field, but there's also there's a lot of title inflation in many fields, but including ours, so that can create some confusion too. But that's all to say, at the outset of forming a union, if that's unclear at all, you can be biased towards I'm in the bargaining unit and I want to be helpful, and my position or whatever this future position is, whether or not it's in the unit, that might be negotiated as part of your initial collective bargaining agreement. And that's neat too, because having a union brings clarity to a lot of those ambiguous roles that we have in this field. Yeah.
That's a huge, I feel like we've had workers just be like, oh, finally have a job description. Oh, yeah, that's amazing. Really good point. Okay, I'm gonna try to share my screen. Let's see, select window. Okay, this is gonna be, you're gonna see the slides, but everyone knows it's a Google slide. Maybe I will, sorry. Oh, now I can't. Oops. Having two monitors, blessing and a curse. Also, what an insane problem to even list out. I ignore this. Okay, let's see. All right, so this, can you see this?
Can't see it yet.
We can't.
You have to drag it to the other monitor, or we can't. Well, let me check the or folks in the chat. Can you see?
Look at that.
Yay! All right, cool.
Okay, but Aaron, you probably can't read that, can you?
I can get close to it and read it.
Okay, cool. No, I mean I'll read it out loud. Okay. This is activity 1 and only. So get excited. This is an activity. This is about organizing to get people on cards. So the situation is that it is your second week on a new gubernatorial campaign for Peppa Pig. What a good candidate. The candidate is a progressive, challenging an incumbent Democrat, Susie Sheep, in the primary and is very strong on labor issues. However, since you started, you've worked at least 10 hours every day and are earning less than $15 an hour. Plus, you were told that there would be a stipend for healthcare, but you haven't heard anything since, and no one seems to know what you're talking about. You want to form a union. There are 20 people on the campaign. 12 are field organizers. This is the first job for many of them, and some new folks don't want to rock the boat. There are 2 veterans who are regional organizing directors. One feels like this is just how campaigns are, while the other believes it is time for a change. The field director has been in a campaign union before and is a major advocate for the union. They believe that the union will help them get a raise. There are 5 comm staffers. One has said that unionizing would look bad in the press. One other worked for the candidate previously and has a personal relationship. There are 2 finance staffers. One thinks the candidate cannot afford a union, while the other thinks that they can if the candidate prioritizes the right things. And then finally, the campaign manager is very friendly, and you believe that she would be a champion for the union. So the task in front of us is to map out how you would organize this unit to reach 70% of workers on cards. Be creative with your organizing strategies, utilizing one-on-one conversations, recruiting leaders, small group meetings, etc. So typically we would put you in a breakout group and have you talk about it. We obviously are not going to do that here. So we'll give folks a second to think about it. But if you have any ideas or thoughts, you can put them in the chat. And probably at the same time, Aaron, you and I can just kind of talk through it too, after folks have a second to think.
I just want to make a spreadsheet. That's the instinct one.
Urge to make a spreadsheet. Yeah. Oh my goodness. That is an appropriate first reaction, I think. So I can't see the chat in this view, so you'll have to be.
John says Peppa for governor.
Great.
Yeah.
This whole thing was just an exercise to recruit supporters for Peppa Pig.
So just to get us started, I think my first instinct would be, well, one, create a spreadsheet, obviously, but that 2, within that spreadsheet, who are the people who are highly supportive of the union already, and just start with some guesses, rating people 1 through 5. Michael is also on team spreadsheet. Yeah. So it seems like we got a couple 5s, maybe a few 1s, and a few folks who are ambiguous.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I would start with the FOs, given that that's the biggest group, probably. And I think I would definitely start. The rods are interesting. So this gets into our conversation around supervisors, right? And how managers fit in, because regional organizing directors sometimes are in the unit, sometimes they're not in the unit, sometimes you bargain over it, sometimes they're like, actually, we really are kind of like supervisors. We shouldn't be in the unit. It kind of varies. Yeah, I would start with one-on-one conversations there. The field director is also interesting, also kind of in that boat. But if they're really supportive, I think that could be a really good tool too. I'm also curious about the other 3 communication staffers. To your point, where are they at? I would meet with them. They seem like, to the confidentiality piece, I would really be intentional and strategic about thinking about the comm staffer that has a personal relationship with the candidate. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it could mean a lot. So I'd probably watch on that.
Yeah, my instinct would be to go to folks who are in that position maybe right before we're getting ready to do card signing, or
Yeah.
You know, depending on what the relationship is, even approaching them after and saying like, good news, like, looks like we're forming a union. We think you'd be a member of the bargaining unit. You know, we'd like to sign cards too.
Can you sign card? That's strong.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the finance staffer piece is, I love when we have strong finance leaders in the bargaining, in the organizing committee. It's such a good insight into what's going on, and can be really grounding and inspirational too. So I think it'd be cool. Another priority would be talking to that person who thinks that, you know, unionizing people on the cabinet prioritizes the right thing. And that's also classic. Like, I think on campaigns in particular, and in nonprofits too, I'm curious if y'all have the table, but there's lots of like, oh, we can't afford it. Oh, we can't afford it. And that's, listen, there's plenty of money in the world. There's plenty of money in politics. It's a question of prioritization. More often than not, there are some campaigns where I have seen the books literally. It's like, okay, this is, you know, maybe we can't get a 50% raise, but we could do maybe a 10% raise and, you know, extra time off or something.
Yeah, the negotiations are also interesting in that they create more transparency around that sort of thing. Because obviously, you know, who raises the money, where the money goes, is a huge source of power anywhere, including in our field.
Yeah, it's a while. It's oh, I love it. So good. Okay, so we'll start with FOs. We'll make a list. We'll write down people's. Usually we use a scale of 1 to 5. Sometimes 1 to 4. Pro-union, anti-union. Yep. And so we'll do one-on-ones. We'll deprioritize the folks in particular. Fish out what's going on with the other 3 comm staffers. Talk to the finance staffer, and then do the math. I don't know where we would be at, maybe at 50%, and then think about, okay, who are the 3 other people we can turn from a 3 to a 1?
And we should also stipulate that the logic here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least the way I learned it, was reaching 70%. You don't have to do that at card signing, but it makes it really clear to management that it's way better to just voluntarily recognize and you got a union rather than forcing everyone to do an election.
Yeah, so you need a simple majority. So you need over 50%. So if you have a simple majority, that is all you need.
That'd be part of my message after I've got these core folks who are enthusiastic about it. If we're already at or over 50%, I feel like those conversations are a lot easier. It's
so much.
If someone's to be on the fence or ambiguous, it's like, hey, bandwagon time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a really good, it's really important, like if people are nervous about taking action or signing onto a card or signing onto a sign-on letter or something, at a certain point, it's like you will actually draw more attention if you don't sign on, because you're one of 3 people who hasn't done that. Mm-hmm. 10 of us are over here together. So that thinking can flip, which is important. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you definitely want 100%, 70 is better, and then 50 is legally, or like 51, I think, is what you have to have.
In addition to some of the work roles and sort of department roles we're talking about here, something else I found when we were organizing was people's personal relationships outside work were super important. So like a couple of my colleagues have a gaming group and are, in the usual course of hanging out and playing games, they'd also talk about work a little bit, but they already had a great relationship with each other pre-COVID, so it was really easy for a handful of folks who were in that group to just reach out to the other folks in the group and say, hey, we're doing the thing. You want to do the thing?
Yeah.
And yeah, those personal relationships are huge. And I think that, that's true in any union organizing campaign, even at bigger places, right? There are folks going to the same church or they're part of the same bowling league, wherever it is. And we have all that going on in our workplaces too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, like that's the core of it. It is, it's about relationship building, and like a yes to sign a card means a heck of a lot more when people care about each other and are in it, and not just in it because it aligns with their values, which is of course important, and not just in it because their friend asked them, but in it because they have genuine and want to have genuine relationships and solidarity with their workers or with their coworkers, excuse me.
And John had another question here, and John, you can take up as much space as you want. You have great questions. I always love hearing from you. Do you have thoughts for this exercise or generally that a supervisor, senior staff, or executive staff should be or not be included in staff unions? I've seen it done multiple ways. Curious about the possible pitfalls here.
Okay, so I think it depends on the unit, and it depends on the workplace. With that caveat, some of the common pitfalls are around power dynamics, right? So you can imagine having like regional organizing directors and FOs, for example. RODs can have a varying number of responsibilities. I've seen RODs be like actual supervisors where they set goals, they hold FOs accountable, they maybe don't handle discipline, but they do alert HR to when there needs to be discipline taken, like that kind of stuff. And I have seen those types of RODs be in the same unit as FOs, and it does create tension. And I think there are some ways around that. Like, for example, we have a unit who the FOs and RODs they do their union meetings half separate. So they have like 30-minute caucuses with just FOs or just RODs to discuss issues that are unique to them. And then we come together to discuss. But I think a common pitfall is going to be the power dynamic there. And, frankly, like the strength and solidarity of the union is not, if that would be made better by having a smaller unit, like that's sometimes okay. Like we have another unit where we fought for this one position to be included, and he's kind of like a quasi supervisory role. And it was fine when that individual was in there, but then he left, and then another individual came in who was not very pro-union. And so now it's like, it's like kind of awkward because it's like, well, that's just, a position does not guarantee it's an individual forever. So thinking, kind of divorcing the personality from it a little bit and just thinking like, okay, what is the best case, worst case, and likely scenario to play out here, and how do workers feel about it? Ultimately, though, it is.
I was going to say an interesting dynamic for some of the folks who are in those ambiguous roles. Sometimes it's an opportunity for them to say, this role actually is senior management. So I want to be promoted. I want to be part of a leadership team, whatever. And it can go the other way too, where it's like, this is a middle management role, and a lot of my management responsibilities are like project management or, pushing some paper around or whatever it is. It's not really management. So let's go ahead and redefine my role, and I'm going to be a member of the unit, and let's kind of drop the sort of ambiguous pretense around some of this stuff, especially, for, the sort of title inflation kind of things that happen in our field.
Yeah. And, I think if you are not in the unit, but you're not senior management, like your middle management, that doesn't, a union is there to advocate on behalf of workers, and middle managers are workers. And so maybe they aren't at the table. Maybe they're not in the union meetings. Maybe they're not in the unit, but we've had unions still send out like a priorities survey to middle managers. We've had middle managers like listening sessions, and I say middle managers, they can look very different, but in a workplace where those roles are confusing and it is decided or negotiated upon that tier will not be in the unit, there are still ways and for accountability and solidarity and for their voices and interests to be represented at the table. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, I think. I feel like we are good to go. But now I'm full, our faces are so big. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's a good little activity. That's the first step, I think. After that would be demanding voluntary recognition once you've got enough folks on cards, and then getting to the table.
Yeah, so the other two topics we wanted to cover were some of the kind of cross-union, cross-industry conversations that are happening that we're all part of, and then also talk about what progressive, perhaps lighter forms of union busting look like, and sort of arming ourselves against those. Yes. So just to kick it off, one thing I discovered in doing this, just as a matter of timing when we were forming our union, I wound up talking to a lot of the different unions that are active in this space. And as these organizations are growing and as we become more familiar with unionizing and forming our own unions, there's just a huge opportunity here for those unions to cross-collaborate and for people who work in multiple unions, unionized new workplaces that they're going into. So that's really exciting. And I also think at the contract negotiation level, having conversations with other union members who've gone through contract negotiations before has been really good for understanding the process, but it's also been really good for generating ideas and learning about some unique challenges that other unions have had when they're organizing. And I think it's just because all of our organizations are so different, and for campaigns in particular, which Taylor knows obviously through her work, they're startups, right? That's a new entity that's forming a new campaign committee every 2 years. So they're starting fresh in some ways, but now we actually have templates and we have best practices that we can bring in to those campaigns. And like one challenging example from tech world that I ran into that was super interesting was a lot of tech companies have unlimited time off. That sounds amazing. Oh my gosh, my work is done. I'm taking off to Hawaii. See you all later, right? Now in practice, if you don't have transparency or management practices around that, what tends to happen is some managers encourage people to take their time off. Other managers don't think about it or discourage it, and people wind up not using that time off. So they wound up in an interesting position in negotiation where this is a cool benefit. It sounds cool. It's part of how we market ourselves and recruit. We want some minimum thresholds for how people are actually going to use this. We want some transparency, and we want, I think it was specifically joint union management committees to handle some of that stuff. And the other big area where I've seen these joint committees that's super interesting is in hiring and recruitment, especially with a focus on diversity and inclusion. And that's really interesting too, because rather than making that management's responsibility and winding up in this position, we often wind up in our field where you're promoting diversity and inclusion, but you don't necessarily have practices to make that a reality in an organization. Co-determination and having workers and management do that together, that's a huge opportunity to say, okay, and the people we're actually hiring these positions, as we diversify this work, as we create work that's more equitable and inclusive, we're going to co-create that together. It's not just going to be on one side of the ledger here.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think unionizing can be risky, right? And me as a white cis het person, I am going to face less retaliation inherently from bosses because of the identities I hold. And I think when you're talking to your coworkers and organizing a workplace, if that's just really important here. And power, the transfer of power is even more, it cannot be fully described without talking about race, class, gender identity, and other identities that you might hold. And so when we think about getting to the table and forming committees and thinking about representation and inclusion and equity in union organizing, and historically in the union movement, which I think has been classist and racist in many different iterations throughout the years, it's really important to have that at the forefront and at the center of this organizing process. And your organizing process will be made richer and more whole and accurate and truthful and just in so doing. And so I think around these committees, around pushing for different policies in your workplace, a lot of this will kind of get unearthed, which can be intense and so necessary and vital for good solidarity work, really. Yeah.
Cool. And going back to the exercise, I saw that Michael had a question here. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the different goals or interests between line workers and, say, RODs and how that might create a power conflict?
Can you repeat that?
Could you elaborate a little more on the different goals or interests between line workers and, say, RODs, and could that create a power conflict?
Oh, sure. So if there is a difference, which again, I think it's going to depend on the workplace and the roles specifically. But if I'm a regional organizing director, and it is my responsibility to make sure the 5 field organizers in my region reach 2,000 petitions by the end of the week. And I'm responsible for setting those goals, or I'm responsible for sending my FOs out into the field and just making sure by all means possible we reach this goal. And it's my responsibility to do that. And it's also my responsibility to respond if the FOs don't reach that goal. That's a little bit different than the FOs whose goals might be to reach their 50 petitions, or make sure that they have time for lunch if they're out in the field, or make sure that they're have enough, gas in their car, or they're not paying to work, right? They're not paying for their own gas or paying for their, parking when they get to their spot. And so it's not necessarily like a difference. I think those are different goals, and that can be okay. And if I'm the other person on the phone with Aaron being like, why didn't you hit your goals last week? Let's talk about how to fix that. And then
I ran out of gas. You're not paying me enough. I couldn't fill my gas tank. I was stranded at a gas station. I tried clipboarding people at the gas station. They didn't like it.
Like, Aaron, it's because you didn't strong ask. It's fine. No, but I think, and if that's my reaction, right? Like that is a choice. But then together, if on Thursday we walk into our union meeting together and Aaron wants to talk about how he's not getting enough mileage reimbursement, and I want to talk about how people need more training because they aren't hard asking, like that's two very different experiences of a similar, interaction. And so you can imagine that presenting. And if I'm on the phone saying, we just need people to get more training, and I'm Aaron's boss essentially, or superior, and maybe Aaron doesn't feel comfortable saying, Taylor, shut up, you're wrong, or like, actually, I see this differently, that can result in line workers or, workers not having their voices or issues heard or addressed.
Yeah, I feel like a union and a good collective bargaining agreement, it creates transparency and processes around those things. So instead of it being a personal conflict between me and my regional organizing director, because I keep it being overly polite instead of hard asking, instead it now becomes an interest-based negotiation, right? And it's my interest is doing a good job, your interest is in getting this goal. Let's talk about how to get there within the context of the collective bargaining agreement and the process we have laid out.
Yeah, and like it should release some of that pressure, right? Like if we negotiate on how goals are set and how goals are met and what happens if you don't reach those goals and how to make sure your hours are being respected, it eliminates some of that interpersonal. It should hopefully address like a little bit of interpersonal issues and like favoritism and harassment and discrimination a little bit, at least on that particular piece. We kind of went off there.
No, that was like hyper specific. That was great. So we should cover like some of the kind of what we call later union busting tactics that we see in this field and some of these organizing campaigns. And these have been interesting conversations because a lot of union organizers I've worked with, they've worked in places like fast food organizing, where management is way more hyper aggressive, brings in the union busting firms, having captive meetings, doing like these Amazon kind of tactics. We rarely see that in our field, thankfully. Some of that hard union busting still happens, people getting fired, those sort of things. And I want Taylor to address that from like a legal perspective. But some of the lighter stuff that happens, I think, with progressive organizing are things like, well, we're like a family here, and this is a really mission-based organization, and we already really have great benefits and competitive salaries and a generous leave policy. And the response to that is, great, let's codify that in a collective bargaining agreement, because I might love my manager. I might think the best manager I've ever had in my life. They might not be there in a year. I might not be there in a year. There's going to be some succession of workers and succession of managers that come after us. And some of those managers, they might be bad. Some horrible thing could happen with your board. Who knows? If you get that collective bargaining agreement on paper, that's legally binding. The National Labor Relations Act is on your side, and then you're protected. Future workers are protected.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that has come up, two other things that have come up within progressive organizing. Some organizations have said, okay, we love unions, we're in favor of unions. The union that you're affiliating with sometimes takes advocacy positions or endorses candidates that conflict with what we're doing. So we're actually really worried about this from like mission alignment. And the response to that is usually like, cool, that's separate from our collective bargaining agreement that we have with this union. The collective bargaining agreement is not going to cover like your position on some development project or your position on some candidate versus some other candidate. And what I do in my personal time to the union might be different than what we're doing on a campaign, right? Even if there's competing enforcements or whatever. So that's a consideration. And then the final thing, and this is really common in the tech industry, is like workers are a little unhappy. They're agitating a little bit. So management says, okay, pizza parties, a little bit of extra time off, and we got great news for you. We're going to create an employee resource group, an ERG, and we're going to give you a couple $1,000, and we're going to appoint like the most agitated people to this, and a couple people from management, and it's just going to be this fun place for you and HR and all the employees like talk about how we can make a better work environment. You can just pitch us on ideas, and then we'll have a meeting later and decide which of your ideas you like or don't like or whatever. And like that can all sound happy, good, whatever. And I think the common response to that is like this is sort of a safety valve for union agitation from management's perspective. It's a sign that they understand the power of union organizing, workplace organizing, and unhappiness that they might see among some of their employees. So it's a sign that like you're on the right track. You're already starting to get concessions. And the other thing to keep in mind is like employee resource groups and all that is they're not legally binding. They're not a collective bargaining agreement. They're not protected by the National Labor Relations Act. So it's another one of those things where it's like, this is good. Love the Friday pizza parties. I would also like to have Friday pizza parties after we do our collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, and if they start offering them to you and you get your contract, that usually has maintenance of benefits, which means they have to continue offering you pizza parties or negotiate with the union. So, yeah, I think those are really, really excellent points. I'll speak briefly to unlawful activity that employers can engage in. So collective action and organizing is legally protected in workplaces that are overseen by the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. And employers do unlawful stuff all the time, literally all the time. And so just because something is unlawful doesn't mean the employer will not do it. And what's difficult about retaliation and especially terminating workers because of union activity is, yes, that is unlawful. Yes, if and when you start that legal battle, you are likely to win. And those battles can be long and expensive. And so if a worker is fired or retaliated against because of union activity, there's lots you can do from the organizing front and a legal front. And also, it's intense. Like, it's a bit of work. So there is safety in numbers. Work together, act collectively, keep your stuff confidential, use your personal emails, use Signal, all that good stuff. And the third is, there is some safety and some protection that can come from affiliating with a larger union, right? So CWG, Progressive Workers Union, Code CWA, any of the unions, any union really, can provide resources and expertise in a way that can help protect y'all and act in solidarity should something happen.
Taylor, I know we just got a few minutes left. Can you share how folks can get in touch with you and CWG if they're interested in organizing?
Yes, of course. So you can check out our website, campaignworkersguild.org, and there is an organizing form you should and can fill out, and we can get in touch with you that way. There's also my email, which is, I don't think I can put it, but it's tbillings, B as in boy, ILLINGS, @campaignworkersguild.org. And I expect to hear from all of you over the next year about organizing somewhere or something. So please reach out.
Yeah, and similarly for me, I'm happy to connect folks with Code CWA if that feels like a good fit for you. And I'm at Aaron Merkis on Twitter. My DMs are open, and that's my personal email too. It's just aaronmerkis@gmail.com. And I'm also a member of the Campaign Workers Guild. I didn't formally organize a contract through them, but I just love Campaign Workers Guild, and I'm a campaign worker, and I like being a member of the guild. And they're very low dues. It's a very cool model.
Yeah, we have associate membership, which is great, $10 a month. You should join our union. It's a great time.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I don't think I want to acapella sing Solidarity Forever, but Solidarity Forever.
Forever. Cool. Thank you all so much for being here, Aaron. This has been a blast. Thank you for helping to organize it. And we hope to hear from all of you all about all things union now and in the future.
You will never stop training me in hard asks. This is my
I was 21 years old. Yes. So fun.
Cool. Yeah. Yes. Thank you all for tuning in, and thanks for the great questions, everybody.
Yes. Okay. Cool. I think we just click leave, right?
Yeah, thanks. So take it easy. Enjoy the rest of the conference, y'all.
Bye, Aaron. Let's talk soon. Take care.
Bye.